ignorance. That's the topic of this video. So if that's what you've come to hear about, you've come to the right place. Perhaps you suspect you have some ignorance that you'd like to work on. And so that's what we'll get into. But first, hello, my name is Michael Dewan-Herrick. I'm the creator of the online store called Attention Bazaar, for which you can find a description and a link below. Please come pay the store a visit and check it out. Now let's get right into the topic. First, I will start with a confession. I'm ignorant about a lot of stuff. I don't think I'm alone. I think we're all ignorant, but let's just get that up front. I'm ignorant. There's a lot of things about ignorance that I'm ignorant of, and I won't be able to speak to. But there are some things I've thought through, some things I think I know, and I am wanting to offer that to you so that you can also reflect on it, and perhaps it'll be useful. And the context for all of my videos is self-development. So I started off, my last video was on awareness, and I talked a lot about awareness. And after I finished that video, I began to think about ignorance, and it seemed really important that along with awareness, we reflect on what ignorance is, because expanding our awareness means moving into the areas where we are ignorant. So that's what we're going to explore in this video. I want to start by asking you a question. When I say expanding your awareness, or if you say to yourself, expanding my awareness, what thoughts or images come up for you? What's the general feeling tone for you when you think about expanding your awareness? Just reflect on that for a moment. See what the general tone is in your mind when you think about expanding your awareness. Then say ignorant, dispelling my ignorance, overcoming my ignorance. What does that feel like? If you're like me, at least on the surface, when I think about expanding my awareness, I often think it's a great thing, a wonderful thing, a desirable thing. Of course, I want to expand my awareness. It's a terrific endeavor. When I think of dispelling ignorance, dispelling my ignorance, on the surface, first blush, I think, well, of course, I don't want to be ignorant. I don't want to be ignorant. What I will be getting into in this video, though, is that there's another side to this, that there are a lot of reasons we don't want to expand our awareness. There are a lot of reasons why we would like to remain ignorant. And we don't, at first, most of us, I don't know what it is for you, but I'd say for most of us, we imagine expanding our awareness is a lovely thing. We don't understand that we have resistance to it. And the same with overcoming ignorance. So we'll be getting into that. But first, I just want to start at the beginning by making some general observations about ignorance. At the most basic level, I want to start by acknowledging that of all the things that are happening around us every moment of our lives, there's only a small sliver of that we can even be aware of. The rest of it remains out of our sight. We are ignorant of it. Our brains evolved for an adaptive purpose, which meant so that we could live, so that we could find food, shelter, we could protect ourselves, and our brains adapted to notice certain things and not notice other things. And this allowed us to survive. This is an inevitable and a good thing, that we're not aware of everything all the time. Our brains have an inhibitory function in which they actually block out certain stimuli, even block motor responses to things, so that we can function. If this didn't happen, we would be a mess, and probably shortly we would die. So This is the ground, the ground of ignorance that we are always inevitably in. A lot of it we can't do anything about, and we don't perhaps need to. One upside to this is that when we recognize this, we can be in a position of humility and awe and curiosity, and in understanding that there is so much we don't know and probably can't know, we can still search and learn and ask new questions and discover new things. There may be some of that vast unknowableness that we can penetrate. And I think the great minds that bring us new awareness and new inventions have this kind of humble, curious awe about their lives and the world. Apart from the things that we will remain ignorant about because our brains simply aren't prepared to deliver it to our awareness, there are the things that are known, that collectively have been explored and understood by human beings and amassed as the body of knowledge that humanity holds. And no individual can know all of this. That's an impossibility. As the famous American, would you call him a comedian, I guess, Will Rogers, said, we're all ignorant just on different subjects. So there is a part of ignorance that each of us has, which is just the area of knowledge that we've never pursued. Maybe it wasn't necessary. This isn't because we're ignoring it or avoiding it or somehow can't bear to know it. It's just we haven't got around to it. For instance, if I tell you that an octopus has 3 hearts, did you know that? Some people know this. A lot of people don't. I didn't know this until fairly recently, actually. It wasn't because I was avoiding it. If you didn't know it before I said it, you weren't avoiding it. You just didn't know it yet. And there is an infinite number of things like that that we're ignorant of, we don't need to know, or probably don't need to know. That's the next level of our ignorance. By the way, if you like this video, please give it a like, subscribe to my YouTube channel, and hit that little bell for notifications for future videos. And if you think it's interesting and you know somebody who would also like to hear this video, please share it. That'd be great. Let's get right back to the topic. Now I'd like to focus on kinds of ignorance that are not inevitable, but are more deliberate, more willful, or as is sometimes called, willful ignorance. I believe all of us are willfully ignorant on different things, and what characterizes those things I would boil down to either they're too painful or inconvenient to allow ourselves to be aware of them and to know about them. And another way to name that is to say that they cause cognitive dissonance, that we've built a map of the world and we've got a rule book that tells us how we're to be. We have an understanding of ourselves and who we are and our identity, and there are certain things we might become aware of that would challenge that, would throw a question marks over our maps and our rule books and our identity, and we don't want that. That's too both painful and inconvenient. From day one, once we're born, we begin to figure out the world. We begin to make maps of it, make meaning of it. We figure out how things work, and we figure out who people are and how we get our needs met and what's right and what's wrong. And we need this map. We couldn't function without it. So it's not a mistake that we make these maps. The problem happens, though, as we age and we have more and more experiences. The maps that we've made early on become inadequate. They're too limited. And if we adhere to them too rigidly, we don't make new adaptations. We don't grow. We don't develop. We refrain from modifying our maps and our rule books and our understanding of ourselves and other people, and we stay stuck. And we stay stuck by remaining ignorant. And in addition to the difficulties that might be posed to us by being aware of things that contradict our maps and our rule books, is that the people in our lives that we care about and who care about us have come to see us a certain way and expect certain things of us. And if we change, we begin to think differently, feel differently, act differently, believe differently, we may be out of alignment with people's idea of who we are. And that will cause a tension in our relationships. And these people can bring pressure to bear on us to remain the way we have been. They can make it costly to veer outside of the box that we've constructed for ourselves and which people are comfortable to see us be in. So it's difficult for us internally, but we're also always in relationship to other people, and their pressure also motivates us to stay ignorant, or it can. At the deepest level, I think this is the deepest level, so our very sense of self may come into question. Who we believe we are, our deep sense of identity may shift, may transform. New awareness may mean that we have to let go of some things about ourselves and embrace some new things. And this can be incredibly frightening, different is to say the least. It can shake us to our core to become aware of certain things. I was trying to think of a metaphor to get this across, and I came up with this the other day. When we think of the lovely part of self-awareness, or expanding our awareness and expanding our self-awareness, we may think of it as if we will be discovering new, beautiful gardens in our favorite park. And won't that be lovely? The challenge is, though, however, that sometimes, and that can be true, discovering new, beautiful gardens, but this other thing can be true. Some of what we discover can be like discovering dead bodies under the flower beds. Further, the bodies of people that we killed and buried there while we were sleepwalking. I'm going to let that sink in for a moment. It's a metaphor, so it could have different meanings for different people. Two that I would offer. One is that the more we become aware of ourselves and the world, we may become aware of our impact on others. We may become aware of hurting or harming other people and then forgetting about them. So this may be one of the aspects of expanding our awareness that happens. The dead bodies could be those people that we've hurt and forgot about. And hopefully they're not literal. They can also be parts of ourselves that we murdered, killed off and buried and got rid of and tried to forget. And expanding our awareness may bring them back. And this can be shocking. This can lead to a period of self-reckoning. This is an aspect of coming out of ignorance. And we can see, perhaps you've experienced this, it's not pleasant, it's difficult. And we can be motivated to remain ignorant about it. The maps and rule books that I've mentioned already also come in the form of stories that we tell about our lives and about the world, storylines or narratives that give us a kind of a coherent story about what's going on. And they, in that sense, provide us a map, a more formal kind of map or story or narrative we could call an ideology. And this is a set belief system about the way the world is and the way the world should be. And it generally has a high value at its core, something that it stands for. For somebody with a very strong ideology, expanding awareness would be metaphorically like looking for more beautiful gardens in that favorite park. Looking for more of the same, more confirmation about this great park. Ideologies tend to be self-serving, self-justifying, and self-reinforcing, and they don't tend to question themselves at a fundamental level. If we're serious about expanding our awareness, it means that we're going to be willing to question our ideology. We may not call it an ideology. It may just be a very strong belief centered on a value that we don't want to question, but we may need to question it. And it's not that that lofty value isn't true or worthy of your attention, but it may be that there are other important values that it ignores, that are not brought to the table, and that by a zealous embrace of one particular value, others are neglected, and this may cause bodies to pile up under the flower beds. And again, like everything else in life, the ideology that we may subscribe to is probably within a social context. We may be a member of a group that has that ideology, and their expectation is that you're on the same page, that you espouse the same beliefs, that you enact those values in a way that's consistent with that understanding of the ideology. And if you question it, or if you bring some new bit of awareness into that group, it could be dangerous. You could be targeted. You could be seen as a renegade, anathema to the group. You could be harassed. You could be banished from the group. And this is no small matter. It takes a lot of courage. One, to even allow that cognitive dissonance to be in our own minds. Two, to bring it to a group. That takes tremendous courage. And I think there's a reason for this, why it's no small matter. We evolved in small groups of people. I think anthropologists believe that probably groups of 125 people, our early ancestors. And our adaptation was social. We had to adapt to the environment, but we had to adapt socially, and we survived within the social unit. So we had to get along. If we broke the rules or somehow got into disfavor and were sent into exile, it was almost certain death. I think our brains and our deep structure remembers this. We don't consciously remember it, but there's a reason why we can feel so terrified to go against the group or to risk upsetting or falling into disfavor with the group. We might be exiled and we might die. Now, we won't probably in this day and age, but emotionally, I believe that's where that deep fear comes from. So it's pretty clear that expanding our awareness and overcoming our ignorance is quite a dangerous journey. It's full of perils and risks and probably a succession of crises and catastrophes and many deaths and the crumbling of our world around us, at least as we saw it, believed it to be. Sometimes when we expand our awareness and dispel our ignorance, we may feel a refreshing orientation to a new world and have that sense of another beautiful garden. But sometimes it's going to entail the opposite, of feeling lost, more lost than we were before we tried to expand our awareness and overcome our ignorance. Okay, so if that's the way it's going to be, why embark on personal development? Why expand our awareness? Why overcome our ignorance? Why should we do that if it can be that treacherous? Well, we can rise from the ashes. We can reconstruct our world, make a better map, get a more adequate and sophisticated rule book. We can rise up into a bigger world with more options, more opportunities. We can have a greater sense of freedom about where we can go and what we can do. A broader range of options. Our new form of being can be larger, more inclusive, more powerful, wiser, and we can have a broader range of options for how to respond to any given challenging situation. That's what's in it for us. That's why to take those risks. So my basic point is that expanding our awareness and overcoming our ignorance is the foundation for personal development. I don't think that's very controversial, or that you would probably disagree with that. The point that I add to that here, though, is that we're motivated to do just the opposite. We're motivated to not expand our awareness and not overcome our ignorance, because there are costs to doing so. There are risks and dangers that can come, and they're not small. So I would pose to you these questions, not particularly to dwell on right now, but you might take them away and dwell on them a little bit. See what you come up with. What do you believe you might be ignoring in your life and in your world? Why do you think you might be ignoring it? What do you believe the cost is or might be in the future of ignoring it? What's the benefit of ignoring it? What's the risk or the cost you fear might have to be paid if you stopped ignoring it? What's the short-term benefit of ignoring it? What's the long-term cost of ignoring it? What's the short-term cost of becoming aware? What's the long-term benefit of becoming aware of whatever it is that you're identifying as something you're trying to ignore? Is there a long-term cost to becoming aware? Basically, I'm just suggesting questions that get at a cost-benefit analysis around ignorance and awareness, so that you can begin to look into this for yourself. We might say that if we're ignorant of something, we don't even know it. But there are things that we suspect, and there are things that we aren't unaware of, but we put them way off to the periphery, and we pretty much ignore them. There is another force in our lives that pushes us into ignorance and restricts our awareness. And we do it ourselves out of our discomfort with cognitive dissonance. Our own close people and groups and our interactions with them maintain it, but our culture at large pressures us to remain ignorant. Whether it's mainstream media, social media, some other form of information, political, business, whatever, there are reasons that people have to want to manipulate your mind, to keep you unaware of certain things and focused on other things. They'll put it in the news, they'll put it in your Facebook feed, and they will decide what it is that you should be aware of and what it is you shouldn't be aware of. And if we let ourselves, we can be led around by the nose and manipulated. These forces will sometimes be driven by ideologies, whether it's political or whether it's a social movement, whether it's a religious movement. There can be a lot of pressure through the media, through our everyday life, just in how we receive information about what's happening in the world. It's good to be aware of this, because this is not willful ignorance so much as kind of naive ignorance, that we don't check out all of the stories that we come to believe are true. We are given certain facts and a narrative's built around them, and an entire opinion comes up, and we can feel quite passionately involved in that and not realize that these facts were carefully selected and the narrative was carefully constructed to make us feel that way. And there may be other things to be aware of and other ways to interpret information that would leave us feeling entirely different. So, yeah, if we're going to expand our awareness, we have to contend with that as well. Not just our own psychology and our own set of interpersonal relations. We have to realize we're embedded in a culture that is driven by manipulating our minds into ignorance. I'm sorry, I'm not particularly a cynical person, but I think this has to be said because I think it's true. There's just a couple more things I want to say. And again, I want to acknowledge that I've only selected a small handful of possible topics, but I hope the ones I've selected have been significant enough to make a difference for you. This next topic, it's maybe the biggest thing that we try to ignore. Death. Our own eventual death. A man named Ernest Becker wrote a book some years ago. I don't remember when, but I think it was a Pulitzer Prize winner, and it was simply called The Denial of Death, in which he really examined our culture's passionate denial of death. We don't want to know about it. We don't want to think about it. It's too horrible. It's too absolute. And I'll share personally that a little over a year ago, I was diagnosed with colon cancer, stage 3B, and I had surgery to have it removed. There was a complication. I wound up with abdominal sepsis and almost died. Came out, went on chemotherapy, and I've been off of chemo now for 4 months, I think. But this past year was very difficult. It was difficult because of how uncomfortable and painful things were with my health. But it was also that big reminder of death. And although I've always kept my awareness of death somewhere around here, at least in my periphery, it was right in front of me. It was right, and it is now, even still in front of me. I'm more aware of it. And that's not bad. I think that my motivation to even do these videos is coming from a recognition of my limited time on this planet, and that I ought to get around to doing whatever I can do to contribute something before I go. Anyway, that's another area that our awareness can and should expand into if we're looking to grow and develop, to recognize whatever grand plans we have, we will come to an end. And we can be aware of that. It can motivate us. It can motivate us to be as present and engaged and make as much meaning of our lives as we can while we're here. And all of that stuff that cancer survivors talk about. I'll be doing scans regularly for the next 5 years, and I think probably for the rest of my life. Death will be more immediately in my awareness than it ever was before, even when I knew it ought to be, and I made an effort to have it be there. Somehow getting cancer gives you a little boost. The last thing I want to talk about is the spiritual dimension of expanding our awareness and overcoming ignorance. I'll find my way into this by acknowledging my own history of study and practice within Tibetan Buddhist tradition, and that in Buddhism, the 3 poisons are considered to be passion, aggression, and ignorance. And these poisons are what confuses us and makes us suffer. And that becoming awake and liberated and enlightened means to no longer be subject to these poisons. I think I've already made a pretty good case for the fact that we can never get out of being ignorant. We'll always be ignorant of something. So we don't get out of ignorance. And to be fair, or to be more precise, my understanding of what Buddhists mean when they talk about ignorance as a poison and overcoming it, it means that when we wake up, what we become aware of is the empty nature of all the objects of our awareness, internal and external. That ultimately there's no permanent thing there. And that's what liberates us. Fair enough. I believe that that's true, and that's an available realization to us if we walk that path. However, it leaves a lot of ignorance of the relative kind still on the table. As a therapist of many years, one of the forms of that ignorance that I've observed, and I've seen this in so-called enlightened masters as well as high-level students of meditation and spiritual paths. It's an ignorance about the place of a secure attachment in our emotional and psychological development. That we start off life needing to have a secure attachment. We develop a certain amount of autonomy and independence, but throughout our lives, to be healthy emotionally and psychologically as human beings, we need an attachment. In the pursuit of the realization of the emptiness of all things and the release of attachment to all things for the sake of liberation, this can be ignored, this can be missed. And I have seen people struggle with that. I, perhaps, to a certain degree, struggle with that myself for a time. until I realized that a secure attachment was just a biological and a psychological necessity for human beings. Without it, particularly in our early lives, we can develop all kinds of psychopathologies and difficulties in life. And we can try to overcome those by getting on a spiritual path. And the teachers who are giving us the teachings and the practices, when they see a struggle, they might just encourage more ardent practice, not recognizing that there's something else missing, something that the spiritual teacher can't provide, but it needs to be gotten by the student, and that's a secure attachment. You may have noticed by now that I really like metaphors to try to get a point across. My metaphor for this is that when we get stuck in that place, it's like being stuck in an elevator and pressing the button for the penthouse and not getting there, and not realizing that the ground floor has not yet been built. We're just in an elevator on the ground, and there is no penthouse there yet. We're not going to get there because we haven't attended to what needs to be built in order for that to happen. And there's a word for this. You may have heard of it. It's called spiritual bypassing. Bypassing all of those early pains and wounds and traumas that we're putting out of our awareness and putting out of our awareness all of the tasks and needs that must be fulfilled for us to thrive and grow in pursuit of this lofty vision of a liberated consciousness. It may be that the very idea of expanding consciousness for some will conjure this idea of enlightenment. What I'm saying is that if you're near there, if that's where you are, good for you. Most of us are not quite there. Most of us have more relative things to attend to, and that if we ignore them in pursuit of this ultimate goal, and actually we won't develop. There were a few other things I wanted to talk about in this video, but I'm going to stop. I'm not going to mention those things because it's gone quite long enough. I really appreciate it if you're still with me and that you stuck here for the whole video, and that's great. Thank you. I'll be writing a synopsis of this video and including it as a PDF with a link in the description below if you think that'd be useful. Sometimes I think we hear ideas and some of them make sense and we think that's a good thing, and then give us a few hours and we couldn't tell you a thing about it. And it's unlikely you're going to want to listen to this whole video again. So yeah, there'll be a PDF with a very brief description of what I've talked about so far. You may want to go back and check out my video on awareness and have that go along with this video. But until next time, I think that's all I have to say for today. I wish you well, and I wish you fruitfulness on your journey of expanding your awareness and overcoming your ignorance. So long.